what we're doing today is we're going to talk about a concept called platform gravity. And really, I'll just preface this by saying it's very much a platform gravity is defined as kind of a contrary to platform stickiness. So we're going to do kind of an overview and get to that stuff later. But this is a way of thinking about enterprise applications, in the cloud in particular, in kind of the new paradigm for this stuff. So where this sort of came from, and it's kind of, I'll start with the story about why we decided we wanted to have a new term for this, was my company, we do, one of the co-founders, we do enterprise cloud search. So we do a single search box from Salesforce, Zendesk, Google Apps, Dropbox. That's all I'm going to say about it. So we necessarily deal with a lot of customers who have lots of cloud applications. And so these are people that within an organization will have, Salesforce, Zendesk, Google Apps, Dropbox box. When we first started doing this, so I have a background in enterprise software. I used to work for Microsoft and a couple other companies like that. And so I have my perspective and my vocabulary to describe the enterprise application, enterprise software world. And we started this company, we've been working in this space, and we started to see this really weird thing happening out with enterprise companies using cloud services. And the best one to talk about is one of our customers actually did an audit and found one of their customer service reps was using on a day-to-day basis 17 different tools personally. So it's not unusual to hear about a big enterprise with 17, 100, 1,000 different applications. But when you think of the term fragmentation, it was always around, customer support people use this tool and salespeople use this tool, and there's this fragmentation between the two different tools. What we were seeing was this one guy who it wasn't necessarily data fragmentation, it was his time. Like, if you think about 17 tools that he would use every single day, that's like a tool every half hour. So it's like you get a half hour of email in the morning and then that's it, and then you have to do everything else the rest of the day. It's kind of a crazy world. And so we went to this company, we talked to them, and we're like, we almost didn't have the process to understand that this one guy who uses 17 tools. So we were back at the office later and we were discussing it. We're like, well, it doesn't really fit into some of the paradigms that we think of in enterprise software and enterprise sales. None of these tools are particularly sticky. Honestly, if you think about a guy using 17 different tools, he probably wants to get off of those tools as quickly as possible, if he can. So there has to be some other interaction at work that's really keeping him using these tools. And that's sort of defining the interaction that he has with those. So that's I think that was the first time platform gravity got thrown out, and then we sort of started refining it. So we'll get into all of that as we kind of go forward. So my name is Pat White. I have worked at Microsoft. I was a product manager at Fortify. I worked at Intuit, and now I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called Synata. So my background, like I said, and I'll kind of iterate this a few times, my background is very app-centric. So as opposed to a lot of other people today, the infrastructure stuff, I love thinking about this in terms of apps. When I think of enterprises, I think of sales guys with their butt in a seat using Salesforce all day long. That is how I think about the world. And that it really translates to what we're sort of talking about today. So what we're going to cover is we're going to start with a really quick history lesson. This should be fun for the guys who kind of lived it, which is we're going to talk about like traditional platform stickiness from like the 80s and 90s and 2000s as kind of Oracle and Microsoft thought about it and how they sort of like locked in, and it was this wonderful game of how much could you lock in all your customers and how brutally could you hold on to them. And then we're going to talk about what's changing. And there's just a real ground shift that's happening right now in the market that is changing that dynamic dramatically. And then we're going to talk about kind of platform gravity. And then my favorite part is that we're going to go into each of the different roles and how platform gravity affects it. So we're going to do a piece about how CIOs should now see the world differently, and how IT managers and how app developers all should see the world a little bit differently now because of this new ecosystem. So let's get started. So the stickiness, I'm sure you guys will all remember this sort of like, are familiar with kind of this kind of concept, which is how much can we lock you in? I was going to start this slide by doing a show of hands with which people's companies are still using Windows XP, but I kind of thought that'd be mean-spirited because according to the stats, it's about 30% of the people in the room would have to raise their hand, and that's brutal. But that is just the classic stickiness example. Whatever it is that led into that sort of led up to that, which is whether it's the cost of buying new licenses from Microsoft, or it's the cost of redeveloping their customer application that was built on Oracle Forms and only works on Windows XP. Whatever it is, people get stuck to these products. And so some of the stuff that really, the real definition of stickiness, it's not that, and this is really important to think about, it's not that people are locked into your products because they love your products. It's because people are locked into their products because it is so hard to move off of them, right? So this is really, you think about the 80s, 90s, 2000s of enterprise software, this was the paradigm. Like, as an enterprise software company, do everything you possibly can to make it as difficult as possible for people to leave your ecosystem. And that's how you have, Oracles and Microsofts and SAPs of the world because of that paradigm. Great example, I used to work with a lot of big enterprise software contracts, and we would do things, which was $1 million of software licenses and $2 million of customization work. So as a CIO, if you just sunk $2 million of customization into a software platform, there's no way that you're going to even think about moving off that for at least 10 years, maybe 20. And it's that kind of mentality that obviously the big enterprise software companies love, but that's what we're changing. So I love this. This is, here's the old guard of the software world, the Oracles and Microsofts and SAPs, and these are the guys that have all fought so hard to have this. So a world that's based around the stickiness concept, which is to say stickiness is, which is to say that you are stuck to a product, it led to some outcomes. So the most important one is that all of the features that products had were very CIO-centric. So features were very focused on CIOs, which is to say customization, integrations, working with middleware, how it was licensed, the ecosystem of SIs that supported it. These are all CIO features. Nowhere in that list of things that you thought about in traditional software was end user experience. Or if it was on there, it was very, very far down the line because they weren't the ones making the decisions. And they weren't the ones pulling the trigger when they had to do a $2 million product. So, we found this great piece of software that someone made. I've seen worse Oracle Forms out there. It's just software and usability was just never a focus of it. So, farewell, stickiness, and welcome to a new paradigm, which is platform gravity. So, platform gravity, we're going to define as the concept is it's a product's ability to draw in and engage users determined by its pricing, popularity, features, and integrated apps, necessarily understood as part of a broader ecosystem. The last part's really important, even though we don't have it on the slide. Platform gravity is defined by the products, not just the product that is being the actual product itself, but by all the products around it. So a great example of this is that when you thought in a sticky world, you didn't have to consider the supporting products. A sticky world, you got locked into Oracle CRM. And it didn't really matter that there were Salesforce and Insightly out there because your company for the next 15 years was going to use Oracle CRM come hell or high water. It did not matter. The new world is very end user driven. So what that means is that it can actually change. So even if the CIO, or even if you put in something like Salesforce, the fact that other apps are out there, like Insightly, and like different mobile CRM solutions, and even like Oracle CRM, which is getting better, the fact that they're out there, it creates this big ecosystem where everyone's tugging on each other. And as an end user, you're sort of dropped in the middle of this ecosystem and pulled in many directions. So we'll talk about it a little bit more, but that's the idea, is that now, as opposed to there's this thing and you get stuck to it and you can't leave, we're now looking at a world which is a bunch of bodies interacting with each other. The underpinnings of this, and this is sort of the most important thing about platform gravity, is that it is now, I was originally going to do something like East Germany versus West Germany, which is it's not about building a fence to keep people in your ecosystem or to keep people in your app. It's about making your app a place where people want to stay, because that is the only way people will actually actually continue using your application. So we'll quickly talk about what happened over the last 5 years that's enabled this paradigm, and then we'll kind of get into the implications for different people. So what's fundamentally changed, this is the high level, but there's really one thing here, which is speed. So the speed of development, the speed of deployment, and the speed that a new company can get software into an end user or enterprise user's hands has phenomenally increased. So it is so quick to get products to market, good products to market, that now you are seeing thousands of enterprise applications. I mean, literally thousands of enterprise applications out there that has completely upended this entire system. So when you think about that world, what begins to matter most is no longer CIO features. It's no longer, what are the ecosystem of SIs and what's the middleware this integrates with. The most important thing, bar none, is the ease of use and the product design, because everything more and more is being driven by end users, not by CIOs, not by IT managers, not by different people pushing down into an organization, but by people driving and pulling products up into the organization. So the most important thing becomes product design. And then, of course, beyond that becomes the ecosystem that you can build around your app, which are the APIs you can expose, and then the integrations you can do with other people's APIs. These are all obviously important, but then when you start thinking about the end user-driven world, the friction-free onboarding, creating users, people getting signed up as easily as possible, these all become incredibly important. So the new players, the new guard is, as opposed to like Oracle and SAP and Microsoft, the new guard really is Google Apps and Atlassian products and Dropbox and Box and Zendesk and Workday. All these guys that are building very easy to adopt, easy to use, easy to deploy, easy to manage applications. And they're creating this entire ecosystem around that. So now we've kind of talked about, we did the history lesson about platform stickiness. That was fun. We talked about platform gravity, kind of the introduction to it. But here's where it starts to get really interesting, which is how do we actually apply this concept? No longer thinking of the world in terms of where you get locked into software, but as an ecosystem, how do different groups within an enterprise actually apply this? So the first is IT. So how does IT actually apply the concepts of platform gravity? The most important thing to remember now is, and this is not a talk by any means about BYOD or IT, the changing role of IT, but IT really stops being a gatekeeper. This has been a trend for a very long time, but it is incredibly important to reiterate because IT is no longer the single source of technology in the company. And when we stop being the single source of technology in a company, your entire mindset has to change. So first rule of platform gravity for IT is that you're not the gatekeeper and things are going to happen whether you kind of want them to or not. This is dragon. And to that extent, you have to know thyself. So this is the idea of really understanding and being very self-aware. So I'm going to take just the smallest of small digs at Google. The Google CIO came out last week in an interview and was very vehement. No one at Google uses Dropbox. We don't support that. That is not an enterprise class product. What's so funny about that is I have buddies at Google who use Dropbox every day. And it's one of these things that CIOs, especially people that have been in the technology a long time, they don't think about a world where they're not the ones making the decisions. It's hard to imagine a world where every single person in your company is making independent IT decisions without any of your input. And so the most important thing you can really do is start to acknowledge that people in your company are going to be using interesting products that you didn't choose for them, that maybe you had no say in selecting, and be aware of that, and then start to actually help them out. So the second thing is, once you know yourself, offer everything. Bring every weapon to bear on the problem. So as opposed to kind of Google CIO saying, no one uses Dropbox, my favorite company that we work with actually has the exact opposite approach. As opposed to saying, okay, we're going to lock it down, or we're going to be afraid, or we're not going to acknowledge it, he says, let's offer everything. Every tool that someone could use, every cloud-based tool that someone could use, we are going to offer. And it's a weird way to think about it, but I mean, the cheapest Dropbox license is like $1,000 a year. So it's nothing for a company to buy 5 Dropbox licenses for a year and offer them to any employees who want to use it. Same with Salesforce and Zendesk and all these different tools. It's very cost effective for an IT manager to just offer a bunch of tools, have it integrated through their SSO, control the process, have the contract, things like that. But then when the employees go to seek out tools, IT already proactively has them available and proactively is controlling them. So they've already put in place protections and safeguards and measures that they believe in for this ecosystem. So it's really, it is one of the smartest things that we've seen in our customer base is someone who just did the approach like, it's such a friendly or end user friendly approach, like, hey, any tool you guys want to use, just let us know, we'll set it up, we'll get it out to you. The exact opposite of a really contentious IT approach. And then finally, as an IT manager, you really have to be on the cutting edge. You have to bring the gun to the fencing fight. It is really important that you are on the cutting edge, because if you're not on the cutting edge, you're going to have users who are. And the idea is that you don't really want your users outpacing you in the technology, because it's hard to be aware. Then you end up with them a couple steps ahead of you, and then you're not sure about security policies and things like that. So the new role of IT, as not a gatekeeper but as an enabler, is actually really fun and exciting. If I think about when I worked as an admin and stuff like that, my favorite part was getting to play with new technologies. And so the new world is becoming one where that is the most important thing that IT can do, is be up on all the new technologies, be aware of all the different cloud applications, and then help enable their people in the organization to use them. Okay, so we covered IT managers. So now why does this matter for app developers or developers in general? The most important thing here, we mentioned earlier, is you have to focus on design. Like, the new world is a design-centric world. End users want to have beautiful products that are easy to use and intuitive. So everything that you do within your organization has to be focused on bringing good products that are usable to your end users. Design is so important to this. It's been called like the age of excellence, because it's no longer okay to release a 5 or 6 app. You have to deliver a 9 or a 10 user experience for it to be acknowledged. And I'm particularly cognizant of this, having come from companies like Microsoft and things like that. Microsoft, we used to joke that it wasn't a real product until version 3, and you'd have like 2 throwaway versions before that. And it's just not a realistic way to approach the problem anymore. So next, you have to be open. And this is really important. As a startup or as someone building an application, as soon as you figure out that you have something that people want, I would say the next feature to build is an API. And never be afraid of building integrations with people who might be tangentially competitive or could someday be competitive or even are competitive. At the end of the day, as an ecosystem of bodies that are all interacting on each other, the more connections you have, the more open you are, the more people will be drawn to your product and your platform. And that is the most important thing that you can possibly do. And then, of course, distribution is the most important thing also. So you have to be in the app stores. You have to be in as many app stores as you possibly can be to get the distribution you need to get the end users and adoption drive into the enterprise. So this isn't really meant to be a talk that's around is freemium as a business model for enterprise applications better or is paid. But no matter how you approach it, what's very important is that you have people that can get access to your app. Because the old guard of having a huge fleet of sales guys that go in and force a product down sort of a CIO's throat is not going to work anymore. And even if you can get it to work in the short term, adoption not happening in enterprises is no longer allowable. So in the old days, I remember some projects we did where you would do a full deployment and people would actually just not adopt whatever it was you deployed. Big CRM systems, things like that. But the CIO still paid for the product. You still got your check. Everything was still pretty good. Now, with kind of subscription-based models for all this stuff, if you can't get adoption, then the next time the contract comes up for renewal, you're going to lose a giant chunk of revenue that's coming through. So distribution is incredibly important. End user driven is incredibly important. And then training and documentation are incredibly important. I think that, especially considering the older versions of these ecosystems and how you would actually build products and deliver products, training was always a line item on the invoice, right? So, okay, we're going to deliver Oracle CRM, and then we're going to do training. That's a couple $100,000. Hey, that's great for the consulting firm or the SI. Anymore, because it's so end user driven, you can't really get away with that. Products that are being built today have to be incredibly easy to use and have either training included or very good documentation, or just be intuitive and not need gobs and gobs of training. And then finally, and this is a little bit of a more nuanced point, but it's very important for app developers and people building cloud software to actively disrupt themselves. So this is obviously, Netflix disrupted their mail order DVD business with the streaming, but I would offer to someone like Salesforce, who, while they have a phenomenal sales group and do a lot with actually getting customers and have been very, very successful, there have been a whole slew of CRM solutions that have been cropping up because people are so annoyed with various aspects of Salesforce. And that could be, that you can only use the API when you pay the $125 a month version, right? The $20 a month version doesn't get access to the API. I mean, there's things like this that are very anti-platform gravity, if I could reference my own thing, that they have to be in a position where they have to disrupt themselves. And they have to go out and actively, offer a lower version that has API coverage, or start offering a better mobile experience, which is where they're getting a lot of heat, or else someone else is going to. And everything moves so quickly that they could very easily find themselves getting disrupted from another company. And then finally, as a developer, you want to be very cognizant of what we're kind of calling supernovas and black holes. So supernovas are ecosystems that are blowing up. A great example is, if you guys have heard of a company called Xero, it's a accounting package in the cloud, QuickBooks competitor, very, very open, is going nuts as an ecosystem, and is incredibly open in terms of that there are lots and lots of integrations. And that is creating tons of draw into this platform. And people are using it, and it is really growing. Versus something like, the Microsoft ecosystem, which is more of the black hole right now. It's not a great time to be a Microsoft developer. It's not a great time to be building Microsoft products. So as a developer, think about the terms of which ecosystems are exploding and which ecosystems are really having trouble and maybe imploding on themselves. Those are them. Okay, so finally we'll talk about the consequences for, we've talked about some of the consequences for IT, the consequences for developers, and now we're going to talk about consequences for the CIO. And this one's really interesting because honestly, we don't really think about CIOs that much. I know from my perspective, I don't really think about the CIO's position that often. But there are massive consequences for the CIO in this new world. So first and foremost, and this, the other thing about the CIO section is that it is probably it's the section of easiest things to put on a slide and hardest things to actually do. So that's the fun part about, I guess, presenting about it as opposed to having to do it. The first thing in this new ecosystem is you really have to plan on portability. That is to say, plan on leaving the platform that you're currently on within like 5 years. So the old enterprise software way of approaching this was that you would put in a piece of software, and I swear to God, 15 years later, you would expect it to be there unless the data center blew up or a different CIO came in and wanted to make his mark. Software was put in to be very, very permanent, and that's just not the way it is. This point directly is speaking towards something like Salesforce, where even though it has a great foothold in a lot of organizations, it would not be unreasonable to imagine a small company like Untitled or a different mobile CRM app growing in and actually having a really major impact within an organization that's using Salesforce. So that is to say, even if one group is using Salesforce, if another group finds a better tool that they like more, and it starts getting used, that's not. We're in a world where they actually might have to migrate, or you might have to apply the same business processes that you have in Salesforce to this new application. So planning for portability means keep as many customizations as you can out of the actual platform that you are using. So this is a weird way to look at it, but something like Salesforce, it has very powerful customization capabilities. And there's obviously things you have to do. You have to add fields for tracking things that you track internally but no one else tracks. You have to add JavaScript to pages. But things that cover big workflows and big interactions between different systems, if you can find vendor-neutral ways of doing that, things like Zapier or different tools, MuleSoft, Talon, things that sit outside of the actual platform you're worried about, that means when you get to the point that if you have to leave Salesforce, your business processes are locked in a tool that actually can be portable between different CRMs. So as opposed to putting $1 million of licenses and then $2 million of consulting work, don't do that. Buy the licenses you need, and then put the effort into customizing an external system that then can move along with your software. And then be a leader. So CIOs really have to take charge, because otherwise their troops are all going to be off there and they're going to be looking the other direction. It's one of those things that it is so important that as a CIO that you are leading the technology and the information initiatives in your company. Otherwise, it is going to go rampant, and everyone else in the company, all the end users, will do whatever they want. It's the new world. It might not happen today, but that is really the direction this stuff is going. And so CIOs have to be leading this, or they're going to get left in the dust. And then, as a CIO, when you're actually evaluating products, and this is where this sort of gets back to the other point, when you're evaluating products, no longer just evaluate for the systems in it, like the SIs, customization ability. Understand the training and documentation, because you can save a lot of money by not having to sign a big training contract if the products themselves offer great customization and great training. So Untitled versus Salesforce, this is a very classic example. I mean, Salesforce is very difficult to use. The documentation is pretty dense, not really very easy. Untitled is this great little app that's just built into Gmail. And so anyone in your organization who can use Gmail can use a CRM tool like Untitled. Whereas Salesforce really takes, they actually have that approach, where they'll bring people in, they'll do the training and all that kind of stuff. So it's a different way of evaluating the products that you're bringing into your organization. And then plan on faster disruption cycles. So plan on, software coming in and actually disrupting you. Plan on a company like Untitled coming in and disrupting Salesforce. Plan on a new startup coming in and disrupting your SAP ERP system. Plan on this happening and embrace it, because it's kind of a good thing. New software is being written. A lot of the bigger companies are not spending the money they should be to develop and keep and maintain their systems. So it's a good thing that younger companies are coming up and actually disrupting them. So take advantage of that. Be aware of it and plan it and include that in your planning. So platform gravity. Get used to it. I think it's really the new way of thinking about this stuff. I think the old methods of locking your customers into your product and doing every dirty trick in the book to kind of keep them there are slowly going away, and a new world that's very based on different ecosystems is emerging. And I'll say that sort of as a final point, kind of embrace chaos. The idea is that everything we've talked about so far, none of it's really a bad thing. I mean, it can be scary, it can be kind of daunting, it can lead to a loss of control by IT and by CIOs, but that doesn't make it a bad thing. And in fact, I'd say it's a good thing, because now there are thousands of apps. And this is sort of our mantra at Synata. We talk about this all the time. It used to be that you got to choose, Microsoft CRM, Oracle CRM, or SAP. But now, your Rainmaker sales guy might have a different sales tool than the guy who just comes in and reads screens all day. Your customer support team that handles one product might have a very different tool than the customer support team that handles calls all day long. So the idea that very specific products that are popping up have really specific vertical use cases for groups within your enterprise is actually a really, really good thing. And it's going to lead to everyone being 1,000,000 times more productive and 1,000,000 times better outcomes. But it requires a bit of a willingness to embrace chaos. So that's it. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time, you guys. This was a lot of fun. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer questions.